At San Jose Civic Auditorium will be former President Bill Clinton, San Jose Mayor Sam Liccardo, Mayor Willie Brown, and Secretary Leon Panetta, among many others. So let's go ahead and listen in to this memorial service happening right now.
Together as a community to honor his remarkable life, to shed a few tears, to share memories, and to celebrate this deeply beloved man. Let's begin with an opening prayer for Rinban Gerald Sakamoto, who is the senior minister at the San Jose Buddhist Church, Betsuane. He has served our San Jose community since 1986. Coming to our city from Hawaii, he brought with him a passion for youth, supporting scouting programs here, locally and nationally. He's also gained widespread respect in our valley as an interfaith leader, and through his work with several peace and justice initiatives. Welcome, Reverend Sakamoto.
We all have memories of Norm. Those memories express a continued relationship we share with him, a relationship that continues to change as our lives change, a relationship that influences how we engage the world, expressed in our lives through grief, through kindness, through joy. A memory I have of Norm is his surprise to learn how his parents had named him after an international airport. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhasam buddham saranam gacchami dhammam saranam gacchami sangham saranam gacchami. Welcome home, Norm.
Thank you, Reverend. My name is Sam Liccardo. I'm honored to serve as mayor here in San Jose. I'm joined, I know, by several colleagues. I see Vice Mayor Chappie Jones, Supervisor Cindy Chavez. Thank you both for being here, and thank you all for being here. I especially want to welcome home those women and men who served on Norm's staff, serving our community and country throughout Norm's career. I know I see a few. I see Brian Grayson and many others here. You know, our memorial celebration provides something, an opportunity for people to come back together who've been part of Norm's life and his extended family in various ways. And one of the great joys of my service for Norm for a couple years as a Capitol Hill intern in my late teens was really the ability to observe and meet these wonderfully bright, dedicated public servants and to join their lifelong fellowship as an auxiliary member of the sorority. Norm set very high standards of professionalism and work, particularly for integrity. And what was really remarkable to me was this ongoing sense of commitment and fealty, loyalty that so many of Norm's team members shared. And decades later, many of his former staffers continue to stay in touch. I see Dean Monroe here. As his health declined, I heard from several. Sherry Boxer-Baker and John Flaherty and Les Francis, so many, because there was a sense of commitment to one another. And when I talked to John Caron the other day about what drove this remarkable connection among all those who served for Norm, John said simply, he inspired me. He inspired all of us. I'd like to introduce two people who need no introduction. Tomorrow, much is going to be said about the extraordinary legacy and contributions of Norman Mineta as mayor, as congressman, as cabinet secretary. But first today, we'll hear from two lifelong friends about Norman Mineta, the person, We're honored first to be joined by Rod Dearden Sr. Rod has been called the father of modern transit in Silicon Valley. He's a 5-term member of the Santa Clara County Board of Supervisors, was a leading light in the creation of our light rail system. His record of leadership brought Rod's name to grace our central transit station in downtown here, and serves today as a great catalyst for a rejuvenation of our downtown. Strong advocate of regionalism, Rod also serves as chair of many important regional agencies.
Good morning to you. I'm Karina Nova, live in the ABC 7 newsroom. We do understand that many of you are watching our live stream right now, and we are waiting for the memorial service to start for former San Jose mayor and member of Congress, among many other things, Norman Mineta. We are having some technical difficulties as we speak coming in from San Jose. So as soon as we get that figured out, we will get this live stream to you so you can go ahead and tune in and watch. But we apologize for that. It should be starting any moment now. And today we are expected to hear from former President Bill Clinton, San Jose Mayor Sam Liccardo, Mayor Willie Brown, and Secretary Leon Panetta, among others, for this memorial. So we're going to put up a slate for you, and as soon as this starts, we're going to take you live to that memorial.
Thank you, Diane and Deborah. Norm always said the title he liked the most was mayor. Before I introduce a couple of mayors, let me single out former Mayor Ron Gonzalez is here, somewhere in the audience. Ron, thank you for being here. I also received a message on behalf of former Mayor Tom McHenry, who is in Ireland, of all places. But Sarah McHenry is here representing our good friend Tom. So Sarah, thank you very much. Today we have
particular encounter. Norm cultivated that connection with his legendary memory.
seemingly never forgetting a name. Far more than some yardstick of political skill, his memory reflected a passion for the people he served and he loved. Our community knew him not as Mr. Mayor, Mr. Secretary, Mr. Congressman, but simply as Norm. My own personal connection came through my dad, Sal, who grew up a few blocks away from Norm on North 5th Street. Norm was a couple years older than my dad, but my dad recalled that Norm magnanimously persuaded the neighborhood kids to allow younger boys like him to join their pickup baseball games at a school field on 4th Street. One day, my 8-year-old dad came home to report that Norm and some other kids hadn't been coming to play baseball anymore. And my grandfather, with tears in his eyes, told my dad that the government took Norm's family away. So Norm's extraordinary journey would begin in San Jose with that poignant image. Him boarding a train in his Cub Scout uniform, losing his beloved baseball bat, government confiscation. Norm's trek to Santa Anita and Heart Mountain would be the first of several historic journeys, which San Jose provided an iconic launch pad. We think about the march that took Cesar Chavez from the corner of Alum Rock and King to Delano, or the sprint of San Jose State students John Carlos and Tommy Smith to an Olympic pedestal, raised fists. These images burrowed deep into our collective soil, one day to sprout its fertile catalyst, transform our nation. As we all know, when Norm returned to San Jose after the war, he encountered the silence that so many Nisei children experience from San Jose elders. Parents struggle to suppress the pain of the loss of their homes, their freedom, and years of their lives, the confinement at Heart Mountain or Manzanar or Tule Lake. As so many families quietly reassembled the broken pieces of their lives, Norm seemed determined to thrive, becoming student body president at San Jose High, graduating from UC Berkeley and serving our nation abroad in the Army. But always, Norm returned home. Mayor Ron James told me that his 1967 appointment of Norm to the San Jose City Council was the best decision he ever made, and a fortuitous one for our city and our country. When Norm ran for mayor in 1971, it was Japantown's elders who launched Norm's career. People like Yosh Ishida, who I believe is here today. God love him, 102 years old. Thank you, Yosh, for being here. Yet Norm united San Joseans of all races in that landslide, winning 2/3 of the vote in a crowded field of 15 candidates. I don't know if this could have happened anywhere else, Norm told one author. San Jose was such a special place because of its diversity. Becoming the first Asian American mayor of a major U.S. city was a great individual accomplishment for Norm, to be sure, but for San Jose, it was much more. It was a landmark achievement that everyone shared. I first came to know Norm as an 18-year-old, as an intern in his congressional office in 1988. They didn't pay me anything. The coffee was terrible. I recall thinking how ironic that a guy who drives an awful-looking Dodge Colt would be a national leader on transportation policy. Yet the lessons were invaluable. Norm never seemed to get rankled by politics or pettiness. He always found time for a laugh and a good story. And on every issue, he applied that enduring instinct to heed those otherwise left out of the neighborhood pickup baseball game. My 2 years gave me a front row seat to Norm's longstanding efforts to pass the American Civil Liberties Act, the legislation providing redress to tens of thousands of Americans incarcerated through internment. The past is never dead, Faulkner reminds us. It's not even passed. Not to Norm and not to thousands of diverse San Joseans with their own experiences of discrimination and injustice. I can still see Norm rolling his eyes as he recounted being approached by a member of Congress who told him, "Norm, I saw your ambassador today, who just flew in from Japan," as if Norm wasn't even American. Norm quipped, "California has an ambassador?" Norm understood too well that the long moral arc of the universe bent toward justice, it wouldn't bend itself. It would take some pulling. Of course, as we all know, Norm secured bipartisan support for the passage of that landmark legislation, ending a generation of silence and awakening our nation's better angels. As he had in San Jose, he calmly, resolutely united people of different races and parties around a central principle: that we might fail to meet our nation's great ideals, but we must never abandon them. Perhaps Norman Mineta believed in us as a community and as a country more than we believed in ourselves. The last time I saw Norm in person, we had lunch together at Minato's on 6th Street. He shared memories of San Jose and Japantown and of some neighbors who helped his family in tough times. We couldn't get him from the restaurant booth to the car without a half dozen people stopping him to say hello, exchanging stories along the way. And Norm seemingly summoned a half dozen names from his 88-year-old brain to the delight of every person he encountered. What made Norman Mineta's odyssey so remarkable is that even as he reached the national stage, he never really left 5th Street. His journey and that of his family meant so much to us because he took San Jose with him. All of us. His story is our story. We all feel a pride in some part of Norm's success. God bless Norman Mineta for his journey. May it never be forgotten in times like today when our country needs it the most. Norm, welcome home.
Thank you, Sam. Willie Brown, Mayor Brown, and Norm were friends going back into the 1960s. Norm was a delegate to the 1972 Democratic Convention. He and I both worked for the short-lived John Lindsay for President campaign. I think Norm was the only Lindsay delegate to the convention. But that's where he and then Assemblyman Willie Brown, brought the delegates to their feet when he implored, in the name of grassroots political activism, "Give me back my delegation." And Norm was one of his key allies in doing that. On the flight back to California, Willie urged Norm to run for higher office, although there is no higher office, right, Sam? Advice Norm took when he ran for and was elected to Congress in 1974. That convention and that fight in that convention cemented a friendship and an alliance that lasted for half a century. My honor to introduce the Honorable Willie Brown, former mayor of San Francisco.
The Mineta family, Mr. President, and a collection of Norman Mineta's political friends, starting with the man that Ronald Reagan often got mixed up by names, Leon Panetta. He'd call him, "Now, are you Norm Panetta or Leon Panetta? Which one are you?" Typical Reagan. Nobody said anything about his issue like they do about Diane's, but nevertheless, and of course, Les is correct. At the 1972 occasion, that convention, we tried to get George McGovern elected to the presidency. He got the nomination, didn't win the presidency, but he gave Norman Mineta, the Willie Browns, a whole host of others who had not really been involved in national politics the opportunity to string together a collection of friends. Norman Mineta strung together a greater collection of friends than almost any of us. That candidacy of George McGovern, however, was in fact the foundation of Norman Mineta's career and a whole host of other careers, including my own. Interestingly enough, President Clinton's career started with George McGovern, the Norman Mineta time, because President Clinton at that time ran the campaign for McGovern in Texas. And that's where I met him. During the course of all these times, when all these young people who had a dream, Norman Mineta exhibited the greatest of all those qualities. Because Norman Mineta had a quality about him which caused people to believe him. They didn't believe me. They didn't believe Bill Clinton. They didn't believe a whole lot, but Norman Mineta, for whatever reason, had an affinity that allowed him to be able to be persuasive and convincing. Having a friendship with Norm over all of the years that we were together, my becoming mayor of San Francisco and having the opportunity to seek assistance from the Secretary of Transportation. There's still projects going on in our city that were the product of a working relationship with Norm Mineta. He could convince the Bush administration, strangely enough, that San Francisco was not a bad place. And you really have to do some imagination to see that happen. But Norman Mineta was able to do that. His own credibility permitted exactly that. When he became mayor of San Jose, in conversations with him about the mayorship, led me to begin to think about mayorship at some point in the future. And when I did become mayor, it was because of the experience that Norman Mineta, in part, had shared with me that he actually had. Norman Mineta served with me in the private sector when we both left the government. And it was interesting because it was a world organization involving transportation that we were a part of. I knew almost nothing about transportation. But by virtue of the Norman Mineta friendship, and we were seated next to each other as board meetings, I sounded like a genius, but all because of Norman Mineta, not because of anything that I did on my own. And I suspect that a collection of you here probably have similar experiences. He would share with you what the answer should be. He would share with you what the idea should be. And when given and coming from him, it was always of the greatest quality. I was very envious of how successful Norm was at having people instantly name everything after him. There's almost nothing named after me. And I was always envious of Norm for that reason. But I knew that Norm Mineta was different than any politician you'd ever know and you'd ever meet. And as I began to think about having children, naming children, I reserved the Mineta name for at least one of the kids. But it had to be a kid that had all the qualities that Norm Mineta had displayed over the more than 30 years or more of our interacting with each other in the world of public policy making. Out of 4 children, only one of them had any interest in public policy, not even remote. The other 3 couldn't understand and did not appreciate my absence and my inattention. But this one, this young girl, had a list almost the way Norm Mineta, you can imagine, would have listed his kinds of things that he was doing in life. Shouldn't surprise you that as an intelligence officer, he operated the same way when it came to almost everything else. And so when I observed that little girl, all I could think about, her name, as she moved her fingers and did all the things that babies do, that's got to be Mineta. And her name is Sidney Mineta Brown, named after Norm Mineta, my friend, because I always wanted to remember how wonderful it was to have had someone befriend me without question and without any desire for anything in return except the kind of public service that he engaged in all of his life. And so I am really very pleased to be given the opportunity to publicly say, Norm Mineta, one more request. You have preceded me. My relationship with the Lord requires somebody putting in a good word.
Thank you, my friend. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. There are a lot of anecdotes and jokes about the stolen identity of Norm Mineta and Leon Panetta. Most are true or true enough. One joke, and I won't go into detail here, was started inadvertently by me when I worked in President Jimmy Carter's White House. But another one happened just last month when I received a message of condolences from a mutual friend of Norm's, of Leon's, and of mine. The sympathy was directed at the loss of Leon Panetta. For everything. But Norm's pal and cohort and friend of many years is here today, Secretary Leon Panetta.
Thank you, Les, for the kind introduction. And first of all, please allow me, on behalf of my wife, Sylvia, our 3 sons and their families, all of whom were very close to Norm. We extend our deepest condolences to Denny, to the boys, I still call them the boys, and all of their families, the entire Mineta family, and in particular, our condolences to the staff, people like Les Francis and other loyal staff. Norm was well served by good people throughout his public career. Norm had a long and distinguished life. But none of us believed we would ever lose Norm. Because in many ways he was life itself. It is said that the only things certain in life are taxes and death. On taxes, I'm not so sure. Depends on what kind of accountant you have. But unfortunately, there are no exceptions to the end of life. But somehow, we're able to live with that reality by embracing life each day and living it to the fullest. That was true for Norm. He lived life to the fullest and enjoyed every moment. He enjoyed every moment, regardless of the challenges. He wrapped both arms around those he loved and life itself, and never let go. Even as his health problems increased, he was always there. He was chairing meetings by Zoom. He was telling the same old jokes. He would continue to laugh at Al Simpson's off-color stories, and Al has a lot of those. He was complaining about polarized politics in Washington, and he never stopped fighting for what he believed was right. One story he loved that I told him came from a Jesuit I knew at Santa Clara University. Norm was not a Catholic, but he loved Santa Clara, and he loved the Jesuits. And he often repeated the punchline to this story over and over again, and would ask me to tell it over and over again. And so I owe it to him to tell the story to you. It's the story of a Jesuit and a rabbi who wanted to learn each other's religion. And so they decided to go to events together, thinking that if they went to events, they would talk to each other and learn about their religion. And so one night they went to a boxing match. And just before the bell rang, one of the boxers made the sign of the cross. And the rabbi nudged the priest and said, "What does that mean?" The Jesuit said, "It doesn't mean a damn thing if he can't fight." We bless ourselves with the hope that everything's going to be fine in this country. But very frankly, it doesn't mean a damn thing unless we're willing to fight for it. And that's what Norm was all about. He was always willing to fight. We were both the sons of immigrants. And when you're the sons of immigrants, you learn to live with a certain amount of discrimination. But nothing could have prepared him for the bitter discrimination Japanese Americans faced during World War II. 10 years old, he was 10 years old when his family was removed and sent 1,000 miles away to a detention camp in Wyoming. Imagine a young boy, an American citizen, young boy, suddenly made a prisoner in his own country for no reason other than that he was Japanese American. For most of us, what happened would have resulted in a lifelong rage. Not Norm. It made him fight even more for a better America for the rest of his life. I first met Norm about 50 years ago, not in California, but in New York City. I'd been director of the U.S. Office for Civil Rights, enforcing equal education laws in the South. Unfortunately, Richard Nixon had made a deal with Southern Republicans, so-called Southern strategy, that he would back off of strong civil rights enforcement. I was not part of the deal. I enforced the law, and I got fired. Mayor John Lindsay, New York City, gave me a job as an executive assistant. Norm at that time was the mayor of San Jose. And what he and John Lindsay did, working with other great mayors at the time, was to put together a conference of big city mayors to basically go after funds and policies that would serve these large urban areas in America. And so the mayors were meeting in City Hall. Norm spotted me. I think I was sitting in the audience, and the mayors were all up front with Mayor Lindsay. Norm spotted me, and he ran up to me, shook my hands, and said, "Thank you for getting fired by Nixon." At that point, Humphrey Bogart was right. It was the beginning of a beautiful friendship. This was the story of two immigrants, two children of immigrants, who experienced injustice, but who fought even harder for equal justice in America. Norm ran for Congress, was elected in 1974. 2 years later, I ran for Congress in the Monterey area. And Norm was right there. He campaigned, he did fundraising for me. And I have to tell you, it wasn't just out of friendship. The incumbent congressman I ran against had made a nasty comment about Japanese. Needless to say, Norm needed no other motivation. He spent a lot of time in my district working and helping me in every way. And ultimately, I was elected and joined Norm in the Congress. And so began the infamous Mineta-Panetta saga. Remember, I used to tell Norm, I said, "Look, Norm, let's face it, the only reason you got elected mayor is because everybody thought you were Italian." We were there in Congress. Tip O'Neill was the speaker. Great guy, Irishman from Boston. And he sometimes would get confused. So he wound up calling Norm Leon. And he called me Norm. That went on for a long time. The Carter administration didn't help. When the Italian prime minister came to town, the White House invited Norm. When the Japanese prime minister came to town, I got invited. The pages in the house would oftentimes come up to me and say, "You have a phone call." And I'd run into the booth off the floor. I'd say, "Hello," and all of a sudden the voice would begin to speak Japanese. Finally, Norm and I said, "Enough of this. We're going to form a baseball team." And we did. It was a good team. And we announced to everyone that this team played under the sign of the Rising Pizza. None of that impacted on our ability to raise hell in Congress. We were part of the Watergate classes. We pushed for reforms. We challenged chairmen. We began our own caucus. We had a gang of 4 made up of Norm, myself, Tim Wirth, Dick Gephardt. We were on the budget committee together fighting for priorities that we believed in. And Norm, of course, continued to fight for justice for Japanese Americans. I ultimately became chairman of the budget committee, and Norm became chairman of the transportation committee. We both then moved on to the executive branch during the Clinton administration. Mr. President, it's an honor to have you here this evening with this great moment. Reaffirming Norm's strong views on bipartisanship after he had served as Secretary of Commerce in the Nixon administration, he became Secretary of Transportation. And let's face it, nobody was better qualified to be Secretary of Transportation. I spoke to Norm on 9/11. I happened to be back there. I was briefing members of Congress on some ocean issues that I was working on. And I called Norm after the 9/11 attack. And I said, "Am I ever going to get back to California?" And he said, "Probably not." I remember it distinctly. I said, "Norm, is there no way?" He said, "No. This is, he's grounded all of the civilian flights." And I have to say that Norm made some very tough decisions that day at a very tough moment for our country. But the decisions that he made saved lives. Norm helped to save lives in our country. When I went back during the Obama administration as director of the CIA and later as Secretary of Defense, I saw a great deal of Norm and Denny. Sylvia and I had dinners with them both here and in Washington, talked issues, remembered old times. And I have to tell you something that I never forgot. After we did the bin Laden raid, Norm called me. Someone who had experienced firsthand what happened on 9/11. And he said, "Leon, you delivered justice to bin Laden, but more importantly, you delivered justice to the families of those that lost loved ones on 9/11. Thank you. Thank you for what you did." Norm lived life to the fullest. And because he kept fighting, he made America better. I believe that the test in life, ultimately for all of us, test in life is whether or not during life we made a difference in the lives of others. Norm made a difference in the lives of all of us, in the lives of this community, but in the lives of Americans across this country, and particularly in the lives of Japanese Americans. As far as I'm concerned, Norm did not die. He did not die because he continues to live in those that continue the fight for a better America.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. Norman Mineta inspired thousands and personally mentored a fair share of them all. He did so across the country. But his inspiration and his counsel started right here in San Jose. I was one of those beneficiaries, although my career didn't turn out a spectacular success. But another fellow who was a beneficiary went on to have a great career in politics and public service. Someone who has been a tireless and lifelong advocate for the underrepresented and a fierce protector of constitutional guarantees. This person is former Congressman Mike Honda. Norm loved Mike, and he was so proud of the fact that Mike came to represent his former congressional district. Ladies and gentlemen, the Honorable Michael Honda.
Who would ever thought that I'd follow all these speakers? Les, thank you for inviting me up here, and Denny, thank you for bringing Norm home. And Robert, Mark, Stu, David, I know for a fact that your dad loved you guys and really thought about you constantly. And then you're the love of his life. It's difficult to follow all these speakers because they'll tell the same stories that you want to tell. And I suspect that a lot of the stories that we're sharing with you, you've seen, experienced, or heard. And so I guess that old phrase, everything's been said about the subject, but not everybody has said it themselves. So bear with me, and I'll try to put a little bit of a personal San Jose touch to it too. And as we all know that Norman Y. Yoshio Mineta was born on November 12th, 1931. I remember that because 10 years later I was born, so I'm always keeping track of Norm by those 10 years differences. He was a natural-born citizen of the United States, a natural-born citizen, American. He was born in San Jose's Nyomachi, or J-Town, as we know it, a racially isolated neighborhood at the edge of the city of less than 45,000 at that time. The Mineta family was torn from their home their parents had built and sent to Heart Mountain, Wyoming. You know that story. He attended public schools and was elected ASB president at San Jose High School, which Don Edwards went to, and I graduated 10 years after Norm did. So we're all Bulldogs. Norm went to UC Berkeley. I didn't have the grace to go to UC Berkeley. He was an intelligence officer in the military. I served in Peace Corps because I needed to grow up and be more intelligent. And then Norm returned home to San Jose. Norm was a family man, a family that shared Norm with all of us. He shared Norm with J-Town. They shared Norm with J-Town, the city of San Jose, and this nation in Washington, D.C. Many people knew Norm, but especially now when there's so much being said about him out there in the media, and to the media, I just want to say thank you to the media for educating more and more people about who Norm was, what kind of person he was, and the impact he has had on this country. So to the media, thank you. And keep telling the story of who Norm was. One of the things that I wanted to do for the rest of my comments is really share some of the things that I've seen. When I came back from Peace Corps in 1967, I was an Asian American, Japanese American. That was kind of weird because I was probably one of the few that spoke Spanish, not Japanese. And so I wanted to figure out how will I become unique in this valley. And my father said, there's a man in city council, he was a JECLer. Maybe you ought to look at him and see what you can learn from him. Well, when I went to visit the city council one night, I started to realize how Norm worked. As mayor, after a city council meeting, he'd remain in the chambers and the dais, but there would be a couple of people with him, just chatting. A fellow by the name of Jim Ono, who was head of legal aid, and Mike Morizona, who was pastor of Wesley Methodist Church. And the three of them used to just sit there and mull over strategies and issues of concern in the community. And I started to understand that city council meetings is something that is agendized. But to sit and listen and try to remember other communities that the city's responsible for was an important task. Norm was a bridge between the unrepresented, the voiceless portions of this valley. He was a bridge and a voice for them. And if you really look at the history of the political scenery of San Jose, you'll find that when Norm was appointed to the city council and then became mayor, he became the conduit for the other folks in this great valley, where he gave voice to the voiceless, and he was the one that used to allow crowds into the city chamber and allow them to express their anger and their frustration to the city leaders. And he exhibited the patience, the understanding, and he listened to them. And in the history of San Jose and the politics of it, that's when San Jose really started to understand, to listen to the different communities that spoke different languages and allow them to become part of the political process. I remember Rigo Chacon, who used to say, San Jose. When you see that word San Jose, there's an accent missing. And maybe a year and a half later, everything that came out of the city of San Jose had an accent on it, because he understood what it meant to be sensitive and culturally and linguistically appropriate. As mayor, he not only allowed the involvement of the different communities, but he also allowed people to be able to solve problems in the presence of the city council. There was an unfortunate incident one time, I believe it was in 1970, where a Latino officer, a San Jose PD officer, was shot and killed by an angry young black man. There were different aspects of this community that wanted their revenge. They wanted to see retribution. And Norm just calmly created a process by which confidence was built. He brought in an ex-San Jose police sergeant, Dr. Lee Brown, to help through that process. And because of that patience, perseverance, Dr. Lee Brown was able to help Norm bring together the community and develop another way of addressing issues between the city, the police, and the community. That took guts. It took guts because on reflection of today, when you see conflicts between the community and the police, there's always, it's binary, it's black or white, it's me or them. But Norm figured out a process where you can build confidence and trust in the institution of the city. So let me go back for a second. So when I did come back from Peace Corps, I tried to find someone, as my father advised, to find someone that had traits that you wanted to be able to hold and internalize. And that was Norman Mineta. When I watched him in the city council, in the dais, how he did address conflicts. He also remembered people who were fighting for justice. I remember Norm, as mayor, was a bridge between the San Jose Buddhist Betsuin, where they were celebrating the 70th year, and they wanted to build a housing project for the aging population of the Japanese American community. The project was able to get HUD funding and the city backing because Norman Mineta understood the needs of the aging community. But in the middle of that process, HUD cut off funding. The administration cut off the funding. So Norm, in his typical fashion, did not wring his hand and say, now what do we do? He just got up and went to Washington, D.C. and lobbied Congress, lobbied HUD, and lobbied the administration, and finally got the money released so that San Jose would have an affordable housing for aging Asian Americans and other community members, and provide a housing that was affordable, culturally and linguistically appropriate for that community. That set a standard for other communities also. So he just did not give up. He just rolled his sleeves up and got to work. As mayor in Norm, I saw one time wheeling in a wheelchair at San Jose State. And I said, Norm, what are you doing? He says, I'm sitting in this wheelchair for a week to understand what it is that people with disabilities have to encounter. You know how hard it is to get off the sidewalk into the street and back on the sidewalk? Do you know how hard it is to reach the top buttons in the elevator? That was another lesson. To be able to put yourself in other people's situation and try to understand what it is, what barriers they face, and what can a policymaker do to solve those problems. He did. He solved the problem. We see it every day when we walk the streets, no matter where you go in this country now. They're called curb cuts. San Jose Airport, there's curb cuts. In every corner and intersection, there's curb cuts. Only because Norm took the time to sit in a wheelchair for a week. And he changed the way people understand that other people have difficulties. For me, at my age now, I'm just thankful for a banister, you know. Norm's actions were my lessons to internalize. When Congressman Norm did one thing that has become common practice among many of the West Coast congressional members, he always wanted to be present here in San Jose. So Norm was one of the few folks that started to come home every weekend. Every weekend he'd come home, and you know, that's almost a 19-hour round trip every weekend. It's 19 hours away from your office, your family, but he felt it was important to be present here and to be able to be present in front of people who wanted to share their concerns with him. And I still remember going to his office off of Winchester, arriving on time, and then waiting 15, 20 minutes to get my appointment done. But his staff were very, very understanding. He says, "Norm will be with you in a minute." And when you walked into his office, it was a very simple office, just a desk, nothing on the walls, and him sitting there with his jacket off, his white shirt tied down, and his sleeves rolled up. And his presence made you feel comfortable, made me feel comfortable. I forgot all about being, waiting for 20 minutes to talk to him about issues that we cared about. That was a lesson that I sort of internalized myself, to make other people feel comfortable when they enter into the room, because a lot of times walking into a congressional office or a congressional setting, there's always seems to be a mist on the top of a mountain, and I never had that feeling. But it did take me a long time to be able to call him Norm, because being a Japanese American, raised to respect your elders and people in high places, you always called them by their title. And finally, I got to a point where I was able to call him Norm. And every time I think of that, I think of that TV program, Cheers, when Norm Peterson walks into the bar and everybody turns around and says, "Norm!" And that's what I see people do when Norm walks the streets of J-Town at 5th and Jackson, or walks into the Foghorn, or walks into Plateau 7, or walks into the Placita, a Mexican restaurant at 3 o'clock in the morning to get a bowl of menudo. They all turn around and says, "Norm," sometimes with a Mexican accent. But they always felt warm when Norm walked in. Norm was patient, he was present, and he was patriotic. Norm was a bridge between what is and what should be. He learned that when he reflected on his childhood internment, that he is an American, a citizen by birth, but treated as an enemy alien solely because he looked like the enemy. That was a lesson he learned, and he wanted to make sure that he became a bridge to fill that gap between what is and what should be. Norm became a bridge for Dr. Edison Uno in 1974. He had a dream of an unambiguous apology from our government and reparations by authoring H.R. 442, which was signed by the President Reagan in 1988. Norm became a bridge for Dr. Edison Uno, who constantly fought for an apology, not only from the government, but from also Chief Justice Earl Warren. Norm served that bridge. It was an important bridge. It was an important act for all of us, because were it not for H.R. 442, where our government apologized to us for setting aside the Constitution and violating the rights of U.S. citizens, if he had not done that, things would be more terrible today than they are. He taught our country that the constitutional rights of every person, regardless of their status, must be protected. So Norm, that became a lesson for me. And you reflected what it is that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. said in his final sermon, when he gave that sermon, Remaining Awake During the Time of Revolution. Dr. Martin Luther King preached about what a man of conscience is. He said, on some positions, cowardice asks the question, is it expedient? And then expedience comes along and asks the question, is it politic? Vanity asks the question, is it popular? Conscience asks the question, is it right? There comes a time when one must take the position that is neither safe nor politic nor popular, but he must do it because conscience tells him it is right. And Norm has led his life in that direction, always asking, is it right? And I suppose being a Christian, he probably also asked himself, what would Jesus do? So Norm was my teacher. Norm was my guide as a man of conscience. You've been my North Star, my moral compass. And to Norm's entire staff, I want to thank you for being his crew. And Denny, I know you're the great love of his life and the sons. You are his legacy. Norm, you're gone. You've gone on, but you'll always be present to me. So I am reminded of your presence when I go to an airport, when I drive a highway, or look at a light rail, a bike trail, a hiking trail, an equestrian trail. And I'll always be reminded of you, and of course, by the ever-present curb cut. Norm, thanks a million.
As we all know, music, when well written and performed with elegance, can both comfort and inspire. One piece that does that, a favorite of Denny's, is The Impossible Dream. It is now my privilege to introduce Brendan Simon, whose father, by the way, was also an intern once upon a time in Norm's congressional office. Brendan?
To dream the impossible dream, to fight the unbeatable foe, to bear with unbearable sorrow, to run where the brave dare not go, to right the unrightable wrong, to love here and chaste from afar, to try when your arms are too weary, to reach the unreachable star. This is my quest, to follow that star, no matter how hopeless, no matter how far, to fight for the right without question or pause, to be willing to march into hell for that heavenly cause. And I know if I'll only be true to this glorious quest, that my heart will lie peaceful and calm when I'm laid to my rest. And the world will be better for this, that one man scorned and covered with scars still strove with his last ounce of courage to reach the unreachable star.
As you have no doubt noticed today, we are in the company of some of America's finest young men and women, members of the United States Coast Guard. You may wonder why. When Norm was Secretary of Transportation, he had the dual title of Secretary of the Coast Guard. He treasured both those titles, and he treasured his relationship with the Coast Guard. Two of his military aides from that time in office are here today. Admiral Manson Brown is somewhere in the audience. Manson, I'm delighted that you could be with us. Another one is Admiral Joanna Nunan. Admiral Nunan was with Denny and the boys at Norm's bedside when he passed away. That speaks volumes about how the Coast Guard and the men and women of the Guard regarded Norman Mineta. It came to be personal. It is my pleasure to introduce Rear Admiral Joanna Nunan.
Good afternoon, Mr. President, Mr. Secretary, Mr. Mayors, so many distinguished people, especially Denny, the boys, the whole Mineta family. Thank you for including me in your family. So my name is Rear Admiral Joanna Nunan. I served as Secretary Mineta's military assistant at the Department of Transportation between 2004 and 2006. Right now, however, I want to tell you something about Denny Mineta. During this last long month since the Secretary died, she revealed that one of the best ways she's had to get her mind off things has been to watch Stephen Curry and the Golden State Warriors work their way through the NBA playoffs. Stephen Curry is a shoo-in for the Hall of Fame someday. He's a point guard, one of the players who will bring the ball up the court in controlled fashion as the center, and forwards run ahead, and as the center and forwards run ahead and scramble for position. He can hit three-point shots from anywhere. He makes key plays, feeding the ball to teammates. And he's perfectly capable of getting to the hoop himself to release his own pretty little finger roll layups. Listen to this from a recent Washington Post profile. Curry has consistently morphed his game to empower those around him. His 3-year partnership with the big star Kevin Durant is the most obvious example of his willingness to share touches and the limelight. But Curry has also been instrumental in coaxing the best out of younger and lesser players this season. Curry has made a point to shower positive reinforcement and celebrate successes. Doesn't this sound like someone we know? I wonder if Denny realizes why she likes this guy. Stephen Curry is the Norman Mineta of basketball. Today I speak for many of the teammates in Secretary Mineta's Hall of Fame career, the colleagues with fond memories of kindnesses, encouragement, and unselfish play. One policy aide with a long shot application to sit on the Surface Transportation Board picked up the phone one day to hear the secretary himself ask him to be chairman of that board. DOT's Inspector General found himself summoned to a meeting with the secretary right at the start of the administration. He was nervous to the point of being petrified by this, but the secretary's aim was to establish as constructive a relationship as possible from the beginning. He should have known, years before, following difficult testimony in front of a committee, he got a call from Congressman Mineta, who assured him that it was his job to speak truth to authority. One staff read a story about a surprise invitation to a football game at FedEx Field, and another, checking her voicemails at the end of a long, busy day, heard the secretary sing all the way through Happy Birthday just to let her know she wasn't forgotten. For my part, in 2010, when I assumed command of the Coast Guard sector, Honolulu, Secretary Mineta flew all the way out from the East Coast just for one day to attend the ceremony. When it was my turn to speak, the only thing I could do was grip the podium and sob uncontrollably in appreciation. People said it was the strangest change of command they had ever to reopen the ports. What should I know about this, he asked. I had to think fast. I said, sir, I'm sure all the captains of the ports grasp the implications of being closed to traffic. However, they have to be sure everything is safe. If a ship encounters some kind of unseen damage or obstruction, then everything is 10 times worse. He listened and said, okay, I'll let them know. I was just a commander. Holy cow, I thought as I left his office, I can't believe I just had the final word in a cabinet-level decision. During the aftermath of Katrina, another staffer and I activated a plan to send the ready reserve ships to the Port of New Orleans to provide food, housing, and office space for personnel on scene. We also had to draw up the necessary correspondence with Secretary Rumsfeld. Secretary Mineta listened to our briefings, he let us handle everything, and he simply signed off to make it official. He never made a move to the hoop, he let us have the ball and score the points. Secretary Mineta used to say, I first met Joanna in 2001, and I've been working for her ever since. That's an old joke, but it definitely scored points with friends and family coming from a cabinet secretary. It also happened to be true. He was there to pin on my captain's boards and admiral's boards. He came to Cleveland when I took over the Great Lakes District, where I am happy to say I was able to compose myself during the ceremony. He's been a confidant and a mentor through the years, the father figure who entered my life when I was 35 years old, who made me feel that serving my country, whether in Washington or further afield, was a family business. In the NBA Finals, Golden State has had their hands full with the Boston Celtics. Their fortunes have depended upon superhuman performances by Steph Curry, who put in 43 points the other night. This doesn't exactly make my point about selflessness and empowering others, but I doubt Denny or Secretary Mineta would mind the comparison. What I mean to say is that the secrets to Norm Mineta's success are solid fundamentals and fair play. His emphasis was not so much the breadth of your contacts around town, it was their depth. Throughout my career, I've tried to follow this example. The homeland is secure when we maintain the infrastructure of relationships among agencies and international partners. If anyone has anything nice to say about me one day, I hope it starts with how lucky I was to serve under Secretary Mineta. It was an honor to be his military assistant all those years ago, and now through his final farewells. I first met Norman Mineta in 2001, and I've been working for him ever since.
Thank you, Admiral. You might have noticed sitting next to me is another officer of the Coast Guard. He's Coast Guard Chaplain Rodriguez. One of his duties today, and he's been performing it the whole time, is to pray that I not mess up. Thank you, Chaplain. Family was at the core of Norm's existence. It is the case with virtually every family wherein the mom or dad is involved in politics. They endured absences on weekends, foreshortened holidays, interrupted vacations, and the constant annoying sound of a ringing telephone. But the good political parents, the caring ones, make up for it in the intensity of their love, their spontaneous gestures, their instinct to protect their kids from the harsher realities of politics and public office. Norm was one such parent. The results of such parenting is seen in the lives and love of Norm's 4 sons, Mark and Bob Brantner, Stuart and David Mineta, 4 terrific young men who are a central part of Norm's legacy. Fellas?
Thank you, Les, and thank you, Admiral Nunan, for an emotional speech right before we have to get up. Okay. I'd like to, again, thank everyone for being here. It's so amazing to not only have some of our nation's greatest leaders, but to have the city which Norm loves so much come out and show their love for him in return. And a special, actually, thanks to President Clinton. What an honor it is, sir, to have you here. And all of the some of our nation's greatest leaders saying some of the greatest achievements of Norm's life and sharing with you some of his stories. I love the stories. I'd like to share with you some of his personal achievements that are not a matter of public record, which I believe are his greatest achievements. We're all familiar with Norm's sense of honor and his impeccable integrity, which has been mentioned many times today. His phrase, always do the right things. And what wonderful qualities these are in a leader. But they're even better qualities in a father, to be honest. I shared with you, many of you, last week, how Norm was always there for us. He was always with us, whatever we were doing, playing catch with Matthew, going on the boat with Bob and Stu and I, and always engaged with David when he was involved with his public stuff. One thing I failed to mention when I mentioned those stories was that through all those things, he was always the man of honor that we have been hearing about today. His unquestioning foundation of integrity always shone through and was always the foundation of whatever we were doing. I also wanted to touch upon something that I just saw yesterday, and it was so beautiful, I wanted to say. When we landed and we're driving through the town that Norm loved so much, we saw the people that he loved so much holding signs saying, "Thanks a million." And it was beautiful to see the people he said that to so many times to say it back. Thank you.
When my mom married Norm, there was a cultural adjustment. No, not an adjustment to politics or even the AAPI community. Both of those groups are warm and inviting. However, my mom, Mark, and I are from Southern California. When my mother told us that she had met someone from NorCal, well, my mother first met Norm working as a flight attendant from Narita to San Francisco. After the cabin crew had finished their service on that long flight, Norm started talking with my mother. The two ended up spending hours over the Pacific just chatting. They talked about a number of subjects, but I know they also talked a great deal about their children. Norm about his two sons, David and Stuart, and my mom about me and my brother Mark. I was a student at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University at the time, learning to be a pilot. Coincidentally, I had told my mother the week prior that I wanted to see the Air and Space Museum. When my mother mentioned this to Norm, he responded that she should bring me to DC and he would get me a personal tour. He would later delight in telling people that he asked me out before my mother. My mom and I ended up spending 3 days with Norm as he took us around DC. He took us through the Capitol, showed us the monuments, and introduced us to countless amazing people. But what I remember the most was at the end of that first day when Norm asked my permission to kiss my mother goodnight. They were married just over a year later. From the very beginning in our family, we never used the word step. In Norm, I didn't get a stepdad. I got a new dad. I also got 2 new brothers. I already had my brother Mark, someone with a sharp mind, boundless compassion, and a musical ability I will never understand. But I now also had an older brother, Dave, someone who inspires others, gives completely of himself, and possesses a generosity of spirit that is a direct reflection of his father. I also got my brother Stuart. In Stu, I received a brother that was like me. We both wanted to be pilots at an early age, and we were both driven by a single love of all things aviation. After my first airline failed, I moved back in with my parents while I got back on my feet. I ended up staying for almost 6 years. Aside from the amazing events we attended and the incredible people we met, some of the best times were the one where we simply sat around the dinner table as a family. When I finally did move out, I didn't move far. My parents helped me to find a new home, with Norm leading the search. With Norm directing the operation, it's not surprising that when I finally did find a place, it was only a handful of miles away from my parents' house. In the years that followed, I met my wife, had my daughter, and built a life of my own. However, a core part of that life was my parents. My mom and Norm would help me out with Madison when I was gone and Kelly was working. And when we weren't working, we would frequently have dinner with my folks, and they would frequently have dinner with us. One of our family's most treasured times was what we called Family Week. Every summer, since my parents live on the water, everyone would gather there, overloading Grandma and Grandpa's house as we spent a week together, playing in the water, watching movies, sharing meals, and spending countless hours building indelible memories. And all the while, Norm would be out there, camera in hand, recording it all. Looking out among all of you today, I know all of us will carry so many fond memories of my dad as we move forward in our lives. I know that I and my family will. but I believe the memories I will treasure the most will be the 31 years of watching him with my mom and the quiet love they shared for one another. Watching the playful times, the romantic times, and the quiet times where the two of them simply took comfort in one another's presence. Norm was my dad. He taught me to be a man. He taught me how to treat my wife. He taught me how to love my daughter. He made me the person I am today.
Again, I'd like to say thank you to everyone that's come to honor Dad. Yesterday, taking that motorcade from the airport, well, actually first greeting Dad, Denny, Mark, Wendy, and the girls, Bob and Kelly. And making that ride back through J-Town, past both churches, the Betsuine and Wesley United Methodist Church, where our grandparents were founding members, stopping by the house. That was difficult for our family. But to see that outpouring of love from those in the community, those loved ones that knew us from the beginning, that knew us since we were kids, when Dad was kid. That bringing him back home from where he started. Thank you for everyone for receiving him. Back to the place where it all started, this whole story started. Dad loved family. He loved that sense of togetherness and closeness that family provided and encouraged. And as for as long as ever, Dad loved extending that idea of closeness to beyond just our family. Many of you know that feeling, have experienced it, witnessed it. I was reminded of this while reading all of the touching tributes and remembrances by folks, either on the Mineta Legacy Project website, on other social media postings forwarded to us, or simply through cards we were receiving in the mail. Thank you to everyone who shared their beautiful memories of Dad and touching photos with him. Their sentiments of how he remembered them and their personal lives was something that brought some memories of my own to the forefront. Many of you know, growing up, I loved airplanes. Not much different than my brother Bob. We had numerous models at our house, many of which Dave made, those plastic models, Revell models. One of the models was a larger model of a DC-10 airliner. And one day I was getting frustrated trying to illustrate it. So I asked Dad if he would take a crack at drawing it. He said in his usual manner, "Sure." Now, how many of you thought that drawing might be one of his many skills or talents? He's my dad, and I don't recall it at that point thinking, yeah, drawing's at the high point of his know-hows. Shockingly, though, but you know what? His drawing was actually really good. Surprisingly good. That vivid memory of my childhood was from our family room in Alexandria, well over 40 years ago. And two things stick with me to this day. First was how good that drawing was. And second, I remember Dad taking the time to sit down and focus his attention on that activity and me. I'm sure many of you have those same stories of that attention and that focus that he would have on whatever maybe you might bring to him or you might want to talk to him about. Another time, and some of the staff from back then will remember this, another time he blocked off his afternoon of his schedule to take me to one of the places that I just loved in Redwood City. I know many of you might remember Malibu Grand Prix. And so as a kid, the idea of being able to drive before you had your driver's license consumed me, and I loved that. So anyway, Dad blocked off the afternoon, and he made time to take me there. And not so much participate, but just watch me in this go-kart going around the track over and over again. And he took pictures of that. He probably used 2 rolls of film. And for my kids, film is something that we would put in cameras in order to take pictures. We didn't have digital cameras, we didn't have iPhones, we didn't have take as many pictures as you want until you ran out of memory. I still have those pictures, those photos in that album. 1.5-inch binder with photo sleeves in it of pretty much almost identical photos of me going around that track over and over again and standing there playing those arcade games. These experiences and Dad just immersing himself in my life back then, very distinct memories. Not different from those of our family when we would gather together growing up. Every summer we would, growing up in Alexandria, I couldn't wait till school was out and I could come back home to San Jose and be with family and friends. And depending on whether it was election year or not, going to the campaign and stuffing envelopes and campaign materials to be sent off. But this was a family business. Public service was a big part of our family. Mom and Dad out campaigning, Dave and I going to the campaign office and, yeah, stuffing envelopes, helping with pamphlets. Those memories of our childhood and the coming together of everyone, that sense of community is something that we grew up with and the example that was set for us. I love that idea. Trying to get our kids to recognize that too in the city that we live. The idea that we're all in this together, and none of this works if we're all not looking out for each other. That was something that Dad taught us. Something that I know that is a responsibility for me too, to continue that for the rest of us, to model that. I see Dad's attention and focus, with our grandkids, with his grandkids, when he was with them. And was reminded again of this, reading all of those recollections that others had of Dad. There's so many memories that we had growing up, and I get these somewhat, not flashbacks, but I see them again with our kids. Like I said, every summer we'd come home, we'd fly back here to San Jose. After school was out, we'd come back here, we'd fly back. And depending on the timing, either we would all come back together or we'd come at different times. Mom would have to wait with Dave or something, and then, or I would come out with Dad, or all of us would come out. But I was reminded of that one time when our son Freddie, Diane had the photo of the video of the Cousins Week in Maryland at Dad and Denny's place, and the cousins would get together. And one year, being out on the water, Freddie ended up getting swimmer's ear. Couldn't come home, couldn't get on an airplane. And so the flights that we had ready for him to come back, I would go out there and get him and bring him home, and couldn't do it. Doctor said, yeah, no, he can't travel. So Dad brought him home about a week later. And it reminded me of those times that I would come back home to San Jose with Dad, travel back. Or there are other times with the kids. Like even this last summer, we went out to be with Dad and Denny. And he would focus there, his time, he would just love watching the girls, whether they're drawing pictures for him or just seeing what they were so interested in those electronic devices. And one of the things, that Malibu Grand Prix, ironically, not too many people knew this, but babe, that was Malibu was my wife and I's our first date, our first official date. And while some of these places are no longer with us, these stories continue, still in our hearts, in our memories. Dad loves hearing everyone's stories, and he knew everyone had their own story. He loved sharing them. He loved retelling them. But most of all, he loved experiencing them with them. Like I said, he knew everyone had their own personal story, and he loved hearing about it. How many of you were asked by Dad, and where are you from originally? Or where did you go to school? Or what was your major? He loved getting to know people and their stories, once again extending that idea of closeness. Dad was always generous with his time, as experienced by staying at events to the very end, talking with whoever wanted to talk. He was polite, he was courteous, humble, helpful, a servant to others, and most importantly, loving. To Dad, I was wanting to say, I'm sorry to Dad that we, everyone, couldn't help him the way he helped us. Help fix that which was ailing him. The way he would help fix things for us. But thank you for setting that example of a life well lived, so we too can continue that. I love you, Dad, and I miss you so, so much.
Mr. President, Secretary Panetta, Congressman Honda, Mayor Brown, Mayor Liccardo, Admiral Nunan, family, friends, family, thank you all for coming out today. On behalf of our family, I want to express our gratitude to everyone who organized today's memorial service, as well as the DC service last Saturday. I saw your love for him and his love of you create celebrations of life that capture who he was. To each one of you, thank you for bringing him home in fine fashion. Now, I don't know about you, but I kind of feel that Dad would be right about up to here right now with all of these talking about him, so we're going to have to keep this going. And if I could, I'll just ask for your indulgence for just a few more minutes. After Dad passed, friends and kind folks we didn't even know started sending cards and notes. One friend's sister sent a picture of an 8th grade class visit to Washington, D.C. And I think we're going to put this picture up. Thank you. The picture was of 30 kids and chaperones on the steps of the Capitol with their member of Congress. Pretty standard fare for congressional offices. On the picture was a neatly written note, handwritten note. Stacy, great having you visiting our nation's capital. Norman Mineta, member of Congress, May 7th, 1985. There are probably more than a few folks in the audience who received a similar picture with a similar handwritten note. But I want to give you a little background on that because it says a lot about Dad, which I feel is important to spell out today. Now, after a hard day at work, he would usually come home after being out with Mom, going to dinners and receptions. They would come home before the 11 p.m. local news. He would change in his sweatsuit, turn on the local news, and start his second workday. He would sit in the Kennedy rocking chair that we got him for Father's Day with a big felt board for a table, and he would begin his daily correspondence. He would take out scores of pictures like this and begin writing these notes. Now, mind you, this was after a long day of working on legislation, meeting with colleagues, etc. He would go on as long as he could until inevitably he would fall asleep. And that last picture, the handwriting would just trail off the picture as he fell asleep. And he'd have to do that picture all over again. Then he'd wake up and he'd actually really go to sleep, and Groundhog Day would start all over again the next day. Now let's take apart the message. First name always, very personal. Appreciation for making the effort to come to DC and our nation's capital. That was so important to him. Our nation's capital, the collective, the community, the seat of our democracy. Imagine an 8th grader receiving a handwritten note from her member of Congress. Imagine thousands of 8th graders receiving a handwritten note from their member of Congress. Now, I can attest to the fact that every single 8th grader from the 13th Congressional District and then the 15th Congressional District received a handwritten note on their Capitol picture. But knowing Dad, that was his goal. He loved the Congress. It could do so much good for people. After experiencing what bad our government could do to its citizens, he was driven every day to show how it could do right for its people. Not necessarily for his own party, not even necessarily by just his own party. Mr. President, I would respectfully say you weren't the only person from Hope with hope. Dad maintained that hope until his very last days. It was one of the many reasons why I loved being Norm's son. To be sure, living a public life has not always been easy for our family. There were some really tough years. But as I've grown older, I've cherished being Norm's son. From 2010 to 2015, my wife Christine, daughter Lauren, and son Matthew Norman lived in Alexandria, Virginia. Same wonderful city Mom and Dad moved us to after Dad was elected to Congress in 1974. Now, shout out, I got to thank President Obama and a very kind recommendation from Speaker Pelosi that I was confirmed for a position at the White House Drug Policy Office and was able and fortunate to raise my own family 50 minutes from Dad and Denny. It was great, man. We had a great time. They would drive over on weekends to watch Lauren's hula performance or Matthew's Little League games, or we'd meet in DC at a Brazilian steakhouse for birthdays, or they'd take us to the Kennedy Center for a show. Of course, it was always family week during the summer, crab fest on the deck, rafting on the river. We all loved watching Dad and Denny enjoy the grandkids as only grandparents can. When I was confirmed by the Senate in 2010, I knew that was a proud day for Dad. So I would look for opportunities where I could share the privilege of being White House staff with the family, especially Dad. As lifelong Giants fans, our family was fortunate to live in DC during the 2010, 2012, 2014 World Series years. After one World Series, the Giants were scheduled, they always came to the White House, but after one of them, the Giants were scheduled to come to the White House, so I requested to bring my dad to the ceremony, to the White House ceremony. I was so excited. Then a scheduling issue came up, and then Dad, he couldn't make it. So we notified the Cabinet Secretary's office, and they said thanks, and proceeded to cancel my invite. Wait, huh? Yes, my dad was actually taking me to the ceremony, even though I was the White House Senate confirmed appointee who had made the original request. Another life lesson of Humility 101 with Norm. I would share this story with him later, and he'd get that little smile and mischievous twinkle in his eye, as his best friend, Senator Alan Simpson, would often describe. It was a half sorry and a little he look. He was a kind father with a sometimes bad sense of humor. And now my family and I are back home in San Jose. Since 2015, we have lived 5 minutes from where Stu and I grew up, 10 minutes from the second house my parents built in 1970, 20 minutes from the Norman Mineta San Jose International Airport. Every day I drive to work on the Norman Mineta California Highway 85, 15 minutes from the Mineta Transportation Institute, San Jose State University. Today, thanks to Mayor Liccardo, is Norman Mineta Day in San Jose. Our family cannot thank the South Bay for the regard you have for Dad. I believe it is and will always be an important civics lesson for our region to make to the rest of the nation. San Jose is also where Denny returned Dad's ashes to yesterday, where he will be laid to rest next to his parents, his siblings, and my sibling later today. I have so much to thank Denny for, but I want to be really specific here. Thank you, Denny, for bringing him home twice. To die in the house he lived with you, that he loved living with you and the dogs, and to be laid to rest in the valley of his dreams. Dad, I am so proud to be your son, and hope that I will be able to live out my life living up to the example you set for us. I will try to be a positive influence in my community, trying to make it better than when I found it, while being the best husband and father that I can be. Now that is really the example you have set for us 4 boys, 11 grandkids, cousins and grandnieces and grandnephews. It was the example you set for our very large extended family of City of San Jose staff, congressional and campaign staff, departmental staff at Commerce and Transportation, our U.S. Coast Guard service members' family, extended family, and to our Asian American and Pacific Islander family members. Trying hard every day for the country you loved and the people you loved. Now I will continue to need you to watch over me and help me do right, both when everyone is looking and when no one is looking and when I'm all by myself. That is really the measure of the person you wanted us to be. Show up, try hard, and do right. I love you, Dad. I am so, so grateful that I am your son. So one final time to everyone here and watching, thanks a million.
Thanks, guys. I call them kids. I can't help it. Great kids. When I sought Norm's help in that long ago state assembly campaign, I'm sure I possessed all sorts of plans and ambitions and hopes. Working with him all those years since, but I can say with 100% certainty that I never thought my association with Norman Mineta would lead to this time, this occasion, this honor. President Clinton, it has been reported, wanted Norm in his cabinet as Secretary of Transportation. But Norm convinced the president he could be more helpful at the time on Capitol Hill, helping push the president's legislative agenda. But time and circumstances evolved until mid-2000, and the president prevailed on Norm to become Commerce Secretary. It was an historic occasion. I remember standing in the Oval Office as the president swore in Norm. Norm became the first American of Asian ancestry to become a member of a president's cabinet. It is indeed my honor to introduce the 42nd President of the United States, William Jefferson Clinton.
Thank you very much. Thank you to Denny and David, Stewart, Bob, Mark, all the family. Thanks for giving me a chance to come and just be here. My favorite part of this service is over because I got to hear all of you. I got to be reminded of what a great place this is. What have we all learned here today? We've learned that our friend was blessed by a legion of loyal staffers and supporters. We've learned that there's a United Methodist Church with a Japanese American minister. I was reminded that I did the Mineta video and how honored I was to be a part of trying to capture his legacy. I was reminded by what a kick Norm got when Mike Honda succeeded him, and I got to work with both of them. I saw that you're still blessed with a great mayor who's quite eloquent. Susan Hammer was the mayor of San Jose the first time I came here. I learned that Willie Brown still got it. You know, I'd kind of like to be Willie Brown when I grow up. we learned that how blessed we were to have Leon Panetta and all the roles he occupied in national service. I have a copy of a picture of Leon and Hillary with President Obama and the chair of the Joint Chiefs and all these people in the room when they were making the call on bin Laden. And after it happened, I got 2 phone calls. President Obama called me and said, "Well, we got him." And I said, "Who?" He said, "Hillary didn't tell you we got bin Laden tonight." I said, "Mr. President, you told her not to tell anybody, didn't you?" He said, "Yeah, but," I said, "she didn't tell anybody." And then she called me and she said, "God, Panetta was great. You know, he was so strong to do this. He had to do it." This is a special place. All kinds of people come from here. And Norman Mineta basically embodied them all in different ways. I loved it when he was in Congress and he co-sponsored in my first term the Family and Medical Leave Act, most popular bill I ever signed. And the Brady Bill, the background check law, which we have been reminded all too painfully today, needs to be updated and cover all purchases of guns. And especially important to me, he co-sponsored the bill creating AmeriCorps, which has given so many young people a chance to serve their country here. I was excited when I met Norman Mineta because when I was running for president, I was the only guy who actually had governed a state that had not 1 but 2 Japanese internment camps at little towns called Aurora and Jerome. And I went there more than once and was very close to the mayor of the nearest town, who was a young widowed school teacher. And she and her daughter were good friends of mine, and I used to talk to her for hours on end about what it was like being a young teacher in a camp where she thought it was appalling that people were forced to be there. And all she could do is try to teach them well and support them and hope against hope that somehow the rest of us would be forgiven for an unconscionable act and they would go on to fruitful lives. All that's been said is more than enough. I want you to think about what it means for you. So what if Norman Mineta lived? So what if he was a great guy? So what if an admiral actually wept in giving a tribute to him? What does it mean for you? Yes, for all of Norm's grandchildren. Yes, for the memories his children and Eddie and everyone who loved him will carry. But what does it mean for all of us? I gave a lot of thought to this. I've got more yesterdays and tomorrows too, you know. We all should be thinking about this. What does it mean? Norm called me one day after I'd sort of sweet-talked him into coming back for an emergency relief operation as Commerce Secretary, in which he got an astonishing amount done in 6 months. It was almost embarrassing, including the declaration of the Northern Mariana Islands as a national monument, Northern Hawaiian Islands. So he calls me on the phone and he said, and I'm out, or on the way out. He said, President-elect Bush has asked me to be Secretary of Transportation. And you know, I thought this was just going to be a temporary deal coming to Washington, and I'd kind of like to go back and make a little money. And he said, and besides, you know, it's an honor to have a Republican ask me to be the only Democrat in his cabinet, but you know how America's getting so polarized, he said, and you think the Democrats will think I'm disloyal to my lifelong allegiance? And what do you think I ought to do? And I thanked him for first asking me what I thought, because, you know, when you leave office, the good news is you can say whatever you want. The bad news is nobody cares anymore. So anyway, so he cared enough to ask. And I told him, I said, Norm, I think you really need to do this. And I think you need to do it because it's unusual and because nobody expects it anymore and because America's gotten so polarized and because you're the best qualified person to do this job. But I said, you know, you could see it back in the 90s where we were going and where we're wound up today, where sort of our identities are defined by what we're not and who we're not. Norman has spent a lifetime trying to be a builder, not a breaker, a uniter, not a divider, someone who used his power to empower others, not to get more power for himself at other people's expense. All that's out of fashion today. Looks like everything we live for, all this crowd that got up and talked tonight, is just going to be put in the trash can of history because the information system is so divided and broken up and so polarized, and so it's like we're all encased in it, and our attention span's about 10 seconds, which ought to bother you. Butterflies have an attention span of 9 seconds. And here we just told this story of Norman Mineta. 90 years. And I used to think about, you know, what made this guy work, because I was so fascinated by the camps because of my own experience. I think something happened to him besides meeting Al Simpson, which is a pretty good deal. When I talk to Simpson, I'm going to tell him that I now know I always liked him because he was a friend of Mineta. But think about this. I think when he was a little boy in that camp, maybe because of his parents, maybe because of just who he was, maybe whatever, I think he decided that he would find a way to make sure it never happened again. I also think he decided, with the help of his family and support system, that he would not live as a victim, that he would not let it define his whole life. Yeah, they were terrible to me. Yeah, they were terrible to a lot of people. People that weren't as smart as my father had their land stolen. A lot of people were sent to those camps just so people could steal their land. So he could have stayed mad his entire life, full of grievance, full of anger, the kind of stuff we see on TV all the time now, you know. He could be looking for rallies to attend just so he could fulminate. And he had good reasons that he could have been really mad for a whole lifetime. And what did he teach us? You have a choice. And he made a choice. And the choice that he made to be the author of his own life, to be a builder, not a breaker, to be a uniter, not a divider, to empower others, not to use others to get more power for himself. Those things changed everything. What was coming out of his life is what you heard in the testimony of his children, of the Admiral, of all of this rest of us crew who liked, admired, and loved him. That's what you need to learn from this. He made the right choice. May not be popular today. May be painful to see people who choose to divide and not unite, to break and not build, to disempower instead of empower. It may be painful to you to see that's all in vogue, but it doesn't make it right. And one thing it won't produce are the astonishing testimonies of these children that were in his life. So I'm grateful I got to know Norman Mineta. I'm grateful that he served. I'm grateful I had the fortuitous opportunity to make him the first Asian American ever in a presidential cabinet. I'm grateful to George Bush, who, when Norm was asking me should I serve with him, still hated my guts. And we became the closest of friends. I was first friends with his father, and I became friends with him when I looked at him one day and I said, well, he was president, and I said, look, I know you can't stand me. And it's okay, you're mad because I beat your dad. I don't mind, I love him too, whether you believe it or not. But if I can ever help you, I will. And if I can't, I will never talk about you in a disrespectful way. I will disagree with you in an honorable way. And so he laughed, and we started talking twice a year. That was all in the future. When I almost pleaded with Norm to take that job, because I knew how important it was in a time we were tearing each other's guts out, that there'd be somebody that just stood there and showed up. A human in full, a life in full. Somebody who was relating to other people in full. That's what we have to make of this life. Every single person in the world wakes up every day with a little scale inside, with all your hopes and fears and dreams on one side or the other. There's the nightmares and the anger and the resentment over here and the hopes and dreams over here. And the great thing about being a human being is you get to reset the scales every day. You get to make a choice with astonishing consistency, decade after decade after decade. A person who might have made very different choices made the choices that brought all of us into this room today and brought all that feeling out you heard. That's the meaning of his life and the enduring impact of it. I don't care what happens. Don't give it up. Norman Mineta was right, and we need to follow him right to the very end.
Thank you, Mr. President. Before we wrap things up here today, I want to take a moment to thank some very special people and friends. I want to thank Denny and the family for the honor of sharing Norm's life with all of us. Personally, for the honor of participating in today's ceremony. I want to thank my partner in this, the co-chair or whatever our titles were. We didn't get business cards printed up, but Karen Philbrick, who's the executive director of the Mineta Transportation Institute at San Jose State. Karen. I want to thank the former Mineta staffers and interns who served with him and who stepped forward to help him. Just one more time, to my colleagues, Mineta alumni, thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. I want to thank the officers and members of the Coast Guard who are here today but who were with us yesterday. I want to thank you for your help, your support, your guidance, and for your service to our country every single day. Thank you. I want to give special recognition. We have dozens of elected officials, current and former, here with us today. I can't name them all. I know that would get me in trouble because I'd miss somebody. But thank you for your service to our community, our local government, state government, federal government. We're proud of what you do and what that means. So thank you to the elected officials. I've already said it, but I want to thank again Mayor Sam Liccardo and the members of the city staff, the people here at Team San Jose who run the facilities, for all your support, your enthusiasm, your generosity of spirit and ideas. I've been banging around this business for a long time, doing political events, and I have never encountered the level of cooperation and support and skill and the spirit that Mayor Liccardo, your team, brought to this task, and I thank you and I thank them. I want to thank the friends, individuals, and corporations, and labor unions, and community groups who have contributed to the effort. I want to pay special tribute to Ambassador Kran Bhatia of Google for their generosity. I now have some instructions, if you don't mind. In a few moments, the Coast Guard will retire the colors. At that time, I would ask if you're able to stand. Then, a final favor. After the benediction, if you will please stay a few more minutes in your seats as the family leaves, as President Clinton and the other speakers depart the auditorium. It's now my honor to provide the benediction. Rabbi Lori Hahn Tapper. Lori is the Associate Dean for Religious Studies and Spiritual Life at Stanford University. Thank you, Rabbi, for being with us. Thank you.
My condolences to Denny and to the whole family. It is testament to Norm's dedication to building inclusive communities that I am honored to be here today as part of a team of various clergy from all different faiths over the last 2 days to offer blessings. Compassionate One, merciful source of creation and love eternal, we give thanks for the life of Norman Mineta, for all he was and is to us and to the world. We give thanks for his conviction to do what was right. We give thanks for the many ways he taught us to speak up, to represent our communities, to be a presence at the table with humility and grace. We give thanks for the ways he taught us to hold ourselves accountable and to apologize authentically. We give thanks that he never forgot his home and his origins, and we give thanks for his love for community and his loyalty. We give thanks for his attention and his focus. We give thanks for the lessons, the stories, and the memories we hold that will comfort us in our loneliness, strengthen us in our sadness, and give us courage to face the future unafraid. And while our thanks and our gratitude is sincere, in fact, we might even say our thanks are in the millions, it is also not enough. A central teaching in my tradition, in the book of Exodus, V'ger lo tilchatz, ve'atem yadatem et nefesh hager, ki gerim hayitem be'eretz Mitzrayim. You shall not oppress the other, for you know the feelings of a stranger, having yourselves been strangers in the land of Egypt. We are so thankful for the ways Norm embodied this teaching. His steadfast commitment to making sure no subjugated or underrepresented group or people would experience what he and his family endured. And so while so grateful for his life, we know to truly honor his legacy, we must act. And so we ask you, healer of the brokenhearted, source of life, and the one that gives strength to the weary, may we here today be blessed to continue to speak out on behalf of those who have no voice, to cultivate understanding and empathy for the other, to find compromise and cooperation across difference, to defend civil and human rights for all, to make the choice to tip our internal scales every day to the side of hopes and dreams. And may we all do so together, with listening, with humility, with love, and with a smile and twinkle in our eyes. And may we do so in Norm's memory. Yehi zichro baruch. May he go now in peace. May he go now in faith. May he go now in love. And may his memory be a blessing. Amen.
All right, if you'll please remain seated, and the Coast Guard will retire the colors.
Colors, halt. Colors, right shoulder. Arms. Colors, ready, cut. color's turn. Hook.
Denny and the family and the speakers will be now escorted from the room. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. Please go in safety and in peace.